All right, good morning all. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council. Thank you all for being here today. It's great to actually see everyone. Exciting. We may have glitches as we go that we'll address in terms of logistics here. There's some question about whether the tables are too far forward, and we're going to get feedback with mics, and we're just going to go with the flow and do the best we can. If anyone has suggestions as we go, make them, and we'll see how this works for us all. But it's just delightful. Amanda is not going to be with us today. She felt sick at 3 in the morning and decided it was wise not to come. And Senator Lang is not going to be with us today, but will be tomorrow. Otherwise, I think all members are planning on being here. Scott is not here yet, but is planning to be here. So we'll get going. In terms of logistics, this microphone system is set up, and you see the red thing on yours? That means you're live. So turn it off unless you're speaking. By turning it on, you're also then on tape. We're recording this both audio and visual. So as soon as you turn on your mic, you're going to be on the tape, just to remind everyone of that. We're going to have a chance at the end of the day to discuss all the proposals we hear today, as we will tomorrow. Just a round-robin discussion, any thoughts that you have. We found that helpful in the past as we debrief. And with that, I'll officially call the meeting to order. I would love for approval of the agenda. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. The minutes were sent out to you with the packet, or were in the packet. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes? Tom moved it. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Conflicts of interest. I'd like to cover both today and tomorrow with any conflicts of interest that anybody has to declare. Are there any conflicts?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I have a conflict with Audubon.
Okay. Any other conflicts? I would report I have a conflict with Audubon as well, and with Washington County's proposal we'll hear tomorrow, in that it involves, some of the projects will involve a group I'm involved with. So I'll refrain from any discussion on either of those. Any other conflicts? With that, I'm just going to turn this over to Mark.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members. Nice to see you all, as everybody says, and it is nice. A couple of things for you. First of all, as I should mention that when you say something, for instance, for the record, Ashley was the one who announced the conflict with Audubon. If you have to speak on the mic, whether you have a question or whatever, because it's audio recording, and also because the video recording isn't panning to the people, you want to state your name, if you would, please. And also presenters, before you speak, we'll want you to speak your name, and I'll give you a little more information in a moment here. Just a note for the council members. At the October council meeting, the council will be considering changes or amendments to 6 different Bowser programs. Those are with buffers. They're Minnesota laws of 2015, 16, and 17, and wetlands. They're Minnesota laws of 16, 17, and 18. Those amendments are going to vary, and you'll get all that information later. But in a nutshell, it comes down to a cumulative reduction in leverage by about 59%, and reduction of acres by 69%, and a reduction in acres of easements by about 48%. Now, let me qualify all that. That's not to say that Bowser programs are not worthy. And by the way, I didn't announce myself when I started talking. This is Mark Johnson, Executive Director. I did it. Also, remember that the Bowser programs deal with federal leverage most of the time, and the feds are not easy to work with. So keep those things in mind as we move forward. But the reason I'm stating it now is we thought we'll be talking about this maybe a little bit on Thursday as we speak about status updates on Thursday afternoon. But we thought the council should be aware of this so that you can tune your ears into not just Bowser, but also other presentations with regards to their ability to spend and whether that ability to spend is with positive results, whether it can be on schedule and whether it can be efficient. So a few thoughts for your there. Kind of to raise your antennas at the front end of all these presentations that come about. A couple of notes of housekeeping for you. The bathroom facilities are just over here to my right. I don't even know what direction that is. I guess that's our southwest, huh? And so feel free to use the bathrooms whenever you have to. Don't feel you have to wait for a break. Also, for the council members, there is some refreshments and stuff for during the day and coffee. So again, at any time you feel necessary to get up, stretch your legs. If somebody is uncomfortable for the council, I do have one more of these lawn chairs in my trunk. So if somebody would want that, you're certainly welcome to it. And you might even be able to talk me out of mine and have me go on a less comfortable chair. The presenters, I want you to know that we have the format today, just to reiterate it, is it's all in the schedule and you've heard it, but it's 15-minute slots. We anticipate that would be 10 minutes of presentation and 5 minutes of questions. If you go over in that, into that 5 minutes of questions, you just won't have the opportunity for the questions. So that'll be to your shortage. I have two signs up here and I will be holding up as your 5 minutes left. We'll hold up the 5-minute sign. As your 2 minutes left, we'll hold up the 2-minute sign, so kind of give you a little bit of a timekeeping along the way. And Mr. Chair, I think that's all I had for now.
All right. Before we get going, does anyone have any questions about what we're going to do today, or just thought I'd ask? With that, I'll get this going. As Mark said, we're going to do 15-minute segments, more or less. If we get done a little early, we'll get ahead. We'll break for 15 minutes in the middle of the morning, and then we've got an hour scheduled for lunch with a break mid-afternoon as well. There are places to eat just up here and to the left. If you go back out to the park entrance for lunch. And with that, I'd introduce HA01, Elm Creek Greenway Corridor, proposed property acquisition. Charles, introduce yourself and go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the council, thank you today for allowing the City of Champlin to represent some of the considerations that we'd request the council to look at today. My name is Charles Lane. I'm the Parks and Facilities Manager for the City of Champlin. We're a northern suburb of Hennepin County. If people aren't aware of where we're at, sometimes I get that question. I hope I get a little bit of extra credit for having to go first today. I need to redeem, and I see I'm number 4 last, or the 4 from the bottom on my scores here for the summary of the memory evaluation. So I got to do something to try and bring up my score here a little bit. But thank you again. It's a beautiful day, and I'd like to just present very briefly today the City of Champlin in its preparations and planning process and its 2040 comprehensive plan has purchased acquisitions along the Elm Creek. The Elm Creek runs specifically from Medina up and flows north all the way to the Mississippi River, and it's about a 25-mile trek up the Elm Creek. And in Champlin, we have approximately there are two properties left to acquire that we've yet to establish along the Elm Creek corridor. If you'll please look at the handout that's in front of you, it's a little bit easier. I'm sorry, it's a little dark in here and it's hard to maybe see some of these diagrams, but I'll start out just by describing at the termination of the Elm Creek is 519 and 701 East Hayden Lake Road. It's owned by Mr. and Mrs. Brown. They're in their 90s, and they've given the city first right of refusal to purchase the acquisition or the land that would be a contiguous aspect of 4 different parks. There's Doris Kemp Veterans Park, Mississippi Point Park, DC Chandler Park, and it would make a consecutive ring around that particular area. If I can draw your attention to that first diagram, you can just see number 1 is highlighted in the bottom right, the southeast corner of that diagram. The second property is 824 Cartway Road. It's just a little bit more northwest on the creek's surface or the boundaries of our cemetery, and it's just probably about 3/4 of a mile from the Elm Creek Park Reserve, which is 5,000 acres of natural land to the west. And if you'll flip over and see on the backside, it just orients everyone to the area that we're describing. The Elm Creek, there's a highlighted red piece of property that's just where it describes Elm Creek Park Reserve. Thank you. And that's the latest property that the city of Champlin has acquired. Mr. Charles Taflin sold that property to the city of Champlin in 2020. The last purchase is adjacent to that, 12701 Quaker Lane, and that was purchased in 2010. So the city of Champlin uses its park reserve funding to purchase and assist in purchasing these particular properties. I think what's unique about these last two, like I mentioned, the city has first right of refusal from both sets of homeowners, and we're trying to acquire these to complete this 2040 comprehensive plan. And while I know that these are metro properties and perhaps not something that the council would consider important, I guess, in aspect to a lot of the other requests that are out there, I would also say that these are areas that are going to allow a lot of nature to be continued, I guess, along the corridor for the city of Champlin. So we would ask the council to consider the 2 proposals only because we can complete this plan that's in place. We believe that the city of Champlin's done due diligence in acquiring these properties over the last 25 years. We have an opportunity to make contiguous trail systems through these and allow people the ability to experience these for nature. And I know sometimes, from what I understand, the council maybe frowns on trail. However, I can say that over the years, I've been with the city almost 20 years, and the population that's come from the urban areas is now progressing towards the suburbs. It's a more diverse area, and I see a lot of kids using these trails. There's a lot of fishing that goes on. Some of the projects that the city has also finalized recently in 2018, we dredged the mill pond, and now it's a very stable fishery. It's very much a different body of water that it was originally. They took out over 750,000 yards of sediment to make these areas much nicer, and that's kind of an aspect to the termination of the Elm Creek. And we're starting to see a lot more use in these particular areas. There is a phase project, if I can call your attention to the front of the handout, where it says Mississippi River. We have the the West Mississippi River Regional Trail is now an agreement that we've signed with Three Rivers District, and that comes up all the way from Brooklyn Center through Brooklyn Park, and the next consecutive segment will be built along and adjacent to the Mississippi River, which will connect Dayton to Otsego. There's also the Mississippi River Trail is one and the same with that particular trail. And again, it's used very much regionally through the Three Rivers Park District to our west. And we'd like to simply acquire these two properties, keep them natural. I'd hate to see them get turned over to commercial properties because the owners are willing. Mr. Brown has covenants that he'd like us to respect and keep this area entirely natural, other than perhaps a trail connecting everything. And the Swatskys, Mr. and Mrs. Swatsky, would like this area to stay the natural aspect as well. There's quite a bit of wildlife there. You see deer, turkey. There's good northern fishing in the Elm Creek. And finally, I'll just mention, the city has undertaken various stream projects. Restoration of the mill pond is the first segment that I mentioned. They rebuilt the dam that's on County Road 12. And we are undertaking in the next month the Elm Creek Phase 4 reestablishment of the stream bank that'll continue into Three Rivers Park District. And so hopefully it's understood that the city of Champlin has well invested their money in trying to keep that area natural and bringing people back to the river. The main resource there is what our objective is. And for a metro area, we're hoping that these particular properties catch the attention of the council, and we can prove our significance in the fact that we can keep these areas natural. So with that, I'd certainly take any comments that the council may have for this particular project. Thank you.
Questions? Jamie?
Wondering if we know what the fishing potential is on that lower mill pond, because it seems like the #1 property that you're suggesting is quite a bit of lakeshore. So just wondering if you can tell us about that area and what kind of access we would be getting for people.
Sure. Again, Mr. Brown has covenants that he'd like to keep natural, and along with that is approximately 700 feet of shoreline. There is an access that you can't quite see here now with the Phase 2 project that we're doing to the north. And there's what's not represented in this 2020 diagram is there's 3 docks that are available for fishing in the lower mill pond, and also in the upper mill pond. When they did this, they did much fish structure, outcroppings, and what have you. I know the DNR stocks it. Our gentleman, our assistant engineer, just retired, Mr. Todd Tumanen. Maybe some of you know him. He would have been able to answer that a little bit better. I do know that we do stock it, though, and the DNR has helped us with that in the last couple of years. Sure. Yes, sir.
Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 questions. The Brown property, has it experienced, or do you expect it to experience flooding in the future by your data?
I do not believe so. This is high ground. It's somewhat bluff area that's in that particular, set of area. It's quite a bit above the lake area.
Then the other one is in the property #2, the Elm Creek Greenway corridor. So you've highlighted the #2 is the property you want to acquire. The piece that you have acquired, are the properties contiguous between those in city ownership now?
Yes, sir. Those are all completed, and that's why we're so excited. These are the last 2 to make that entire corridor contiguous, if you will.
Okay.
So.
Tom?
Yes, sir. Could you refresh my memory? What's the population of Champlin?
The population is close to 25,000, just a little under.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Jamie?
Member Jamie Swenson. My question is, it sounds like you've been very successful in the past with acquiring properties. If you receive only partial funding or no funding for this project, how would you accomplish this project?
Thank you for that question. We have a park reserve that we've established, and we do have money set aside each year as we try to get assistance, and that's how we've purchased in the past. So we'd be grateful for any opportunity and any funding at all. Certainly would go towards a good cause, and the city's prepared to assist with that to make the purchase. Thank you.
I'm wondering, you talk about the owners wanting covenants and restrictions. Does the purchase price reflect that, or is that just their wish?
Mr. Chair, not only is it their wish, however, the assessments that we've done on this, I believe the last one was done in 2010, that does reflect the covenants that they do hope to put on, and it's all natural covenants. They would wish this not to become commercialized and or any residential area. So the city took into account that in the assessment that was done on that last,
So
the appraisal that was done.
The appraisals
Yes, sir.
reflect
Yes,
the
sir.
covenants that you'd put on it.
We feel that I'd like to do one updated appraisal since the last one was about 10 years old, and that would be part of what we would try to undertake to make sure that the prices are correct. But what was reflected in our application was to the best of our knowledge at this time.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, Ron.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. A little unclear. This is supposed to be a habitat project, but if I don't see where your habitat management is being described here, that's one question. Two, if this is so coveted by the city, you're putting very little into the request as far as leverage. I don't quite understand that.
Mr. Vice Chair, I would say that this area is filled with wildlife, a lot of turkey, deer. I don't know that we don't necessarily have a wildlife program in the city of Champlin. We do rely on Three Rivers Park District to help us with some of that. The fishing aspect is probably what we're, I guess, promoting, if you will. That's probably the best aspect I could say for wildlife itself. There's no discharge of firearms in the city of Champlin, so turkey hunting or deer hunting are not permitted, but at the same time, it's one and the same with Three Rivers Park District. So we with that corridor, we hope to continue that natural aspect.
So there is no management. Do you allow bow hunting?
Mr. Shard, not that I'm aware of. We are up against that Three Rivers Park District, and I know that they do allow shotgun hunting, but in the city boundaries, there's not. Or I'm not sure that that occurs. I've not had that in 20 years, at least in my tenure.
What about adding some money to this project, the city?
I'm sorry, can you clarify, please?
Well, in your proposal, you have a leverage of only 34,000, and you're asking for 1.5 million.
Yes, sir. We are. We know that this property is close to $500,000 or over, and again, based on the original appraisal, this one probably goes for 750 to 800,000, and so, the city's requesting the council to, determine what's eligible or what would be applicable to this, and the city would hope to supplement.
Right now, they only hope to put 34,000 into it?
Again, that 34,000 would be established for trails and for taking some of the buildings down, but that should also be in that application.
I think Ron is saying, why isn't the city funding part of the purchase price, not the 34,000, and then I'll let you answer that, and then we'll move on.
Sure. I think the city is willing to, fund, just as we have the other aspects and the other acquisitions that we've taken care of in the past. It just so happens that, there's $100 million worth of opportunity here. What does the council feel the value is of that particular property and helping the city to establish this? I guess that's really what it comes down to is how can we partner on this? What can happen here, and what can the city do? Once the council decides what they'd like to contribute.
All right, I'm gonna let Jamie go, and then we are gonna move on.
All right, Jamie Becker-Finn. So I noticed when I was looking at this proposal that you are planning to do buckthorn removal, some prairie restoration, and management of emerald ash borer. And I'm wondering if this is a case where maybe as someone who's applying who doesn't do this every single year, you may have not calculated that as some of the efforts and the spending that's going to go towards that project. It wasn't clear to me that that was included in that 34,000.
Thank you for that question. Each year, the city signs on with the Hennepin County STS program for about 2 weeks worth of buckthorn removal. So that was also calculated in. Emerald ash borer, we have a program since 2012. We received our third, now fourth grant from Hennepin County to assist the city with emerald ash borer, which are identified in these areas. And so we do have a plan to take and do some of that. The prairie restoration, yes, we also have our crews, our public works crews, and undertake that particular aspect.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair.
We will move on to project HAO2, Dakota County Habitat Protection. Welcome, and remember to give us your names.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the council. My name is We'll start again. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the council. My name is Al Singer. I'm the Land Conservation Manager with Dakota County, and with me is Lisa West. She's the Senior Project Manager and also the Grant Administrator for the current Outdoor Heritage Appropriations for the county. Lisa and I have now been working together on conservation efforts in Dakota County for more than 17 years. We're pleased to be here this morning to present our 8th phase of Dakota County Habitat Protection and Restoration. You know, I'm really proud that Dakota County has really been known as an innovative and a committed conservation leader in both planning and then implementing conservation plans. Based on the 2001 Farmland and Natural Area Protection Plan and then the subsequent $20 million bond referendum in 2003, that really launched the county's conservation efforts beyond its regional park system. Since that time, we've protected almost 12,000 acres with 148 different acquisition projects, both conservation easements and fee title. The county board approved a natural resource management system plan in 2017 that includes all of the parks, all of the greenways, and the easements. Since that time, all but one regional park reserve has now had a natural resource management plan completed. That's almost 4,200 acres. Of that 4,200 acres, almost 2,000 acres have been fully restored. We've completed one 8-mile greenway system involving 4 cities as part of a natural resource management plan. And all of the natural area easements from the inception have required a natural resource management plan that is updated every 5 years. In 2018, the county began its next generation of planning for conservation, and in 2020, the county board approved the land conservation plan for Dakota County. And most recently, the county completed a comprehensive groundwater plan to protect our precious groundwater resources. With regard to the land conservation plan, I want to draw your attention to 3 different components. One of the components is the framework of which we're going to focus our efforts, and that's really depicted on the map that Lisa's going to hold up here. So this is really a landscape approach to habitat protection and restoration. It's based on the land that's already been protected, whether it's federal, state, regional, county, or private. That totals about 36,000 acres in the county. What we've identified through that process, through geospatial analysis, hydrologic studies, soil studies, an updated MLCCS, we've identified another 40,000 acres of unprotected land that would be important in terms of connections, buffering, enlarging the areas that have already been protected. This again is really how we're proposing to approach conservation, reaching out to all of the individual landowners to really determine what and how the county can meet their needs or their interests with regards to conservation. The other approach that we recognize is that cities are maybe interested, but they don't have the capacity or the budget to actually do a lot of natural resource work. In Dakota County, city parks comprise almost 8,000 acres. Of that amount, about 4,200 acres is natural or passive. And of that 4,000 acres, less than 28% is actually being managed. And so what we did to address that, included in the plan, is to create the City-County Conservation Collaborative. And I'm happy to report that all 10 of the cities, representing almost 400,000 people, have now agreed to participate in the collaborative. They've submitted their top priority restoration projects, and this is just the beginning in terms of building efficiency and capacity and commitment on the part of cities to do their part in natural resource protection and management in the county. The third element is something that is really, really important, and that is in Dakota County, we still have about 230,000 acres of agricultural lands that are cultivated mostly with row crops. And we know that a lot of that current cultivated land were former wetlands. And so one of the major initiatives of the Land Conservation Plan is to do large-scale wetland restoration in the agricultural landscape of the county. It's complicated, it's time-consuming, but what we're finding is that the typical appraisal approach does not work effectively. And so one of the things that we would like to have sort of a further conversation with the council on is a possible alternative to valuation that really mirrors how Bowser implements their wetland banking program. And with that, I would turn it over to Lisa to describe what we're proposing in this proposal.
Good morning. We do have a history, grateful history of appropriations from outdoor heritage. Between 2009 and 2014, we have received 5 appropriations totaling about $6.6 million. And with that, we have protected and restored over 2,100 acres. In 2018, we received an allocation of $2.288 million. We have protected and restored at least 643 acres with that appropriation. And then we also have an appropriation for 2019 totaling $3.516 million, and we have multiple projects underway to expend those grant funds and our leveraged county match. Our current proposal has 4 main activities included in it. Activity 1 is to assess and prioritize restoration activities. We're not requesting any grant funds for that activity. We will prioritize restoration areas and goals and activities and determine which landowners that already have permanently protected land are interested and willing to participate in further restoration. We'll complete new or update our natural resource management plans for all of these sites and align that with outdoor heritage and the county's priorities and funding. Activity 2 is to implement restoration activities on protected public and private lands. Those activities would include completing landowner natural resource management agreements, if not already in place. That's what we use to implement the natural resource management plans. That's where the landowner and the county are agreeing to the responsibilities and who's going to pay for what and who's going to do for what in a 5-year period. We'll contract for necessary natural resource services and implement priority activities to restore approximately 1,100 acres of various permanently protected habitats. And for that activity, we're requesting $3.2 million. Activity 3 is to refine targeted natural habitat protection areas. Again, no grant funds are requested for that activity. We're going to conduct outreach within these conservation focus areas that we've shown you on this map and determine what the conservation interests are of the landowners within those conservation focus areas and begin developing and strengthening those relationships that are so important for a voluntary program like this. We'll complete initial habitat assessment for interested landowners, and we'll use a technical advisory committee to recommend protection projects based on these revised project criteria that we've developed to go along with our new plan. Activity 4 is to acquire easements and fee title. And that's where we would complete valuation and negotiation and develop the natural resource management plans that we require for each and do our due diligence for about an estimated 570 acres. For that, we're requesting $4.8 million. Some of you on the council may be asking, why fund this proposal? First, Dakota County is home to 425,000 people in a very diverse ecological landscape. We have cities, townships, natural areas, rivers and streams, and farms, requiring a comprehensive, integrated, and collaborative approach to protecting and restoring habitat. 2, Dakota County is a committed and innovative conservation leader in planning and implementing natural resource protection and management. And 3, Dakota County provides significant cash and in-kind staff match, approximately $2.3 million in this case, with the experience and capacity to achieve conservation successes. Thank you for your consideration, and we would welcome any comments or questions from members.
Thank you. Any questions? Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I first look at the new list of applicants, I go, oh my God, Dakota County is back in here again. We have given them a lot of money, and I go, where are the rest of the counties? How come they're not doing? And this is a backward way of saying congratulations, because I've been to some of your projects, and you're here, and you're putting in plenty of your own money too, the county citizens are, and so from that standpoint, good job. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, thank you for coming up and joining us today. Appreciate it. Next on our list is HAO3, Integrating Habitat and Clean Water.
Good morning, Chair Hartwell and council members. Sharon was just saying neither one of us looks like Bill Penning, whose name is on the proposal. So I'm Julie Westerland. I'm the One Watershed, One Plan Program Coordinator for Bowser. And this is Sharon Doucette, who's the Easement Section Manager for Bowser. And I want to set up my presentation today with a really quick story. So last week, I was teaching the Communications Merit Badge class for my son's scout troop. And we talked about how a good speech starts with a story and how a good sales presentation lays out a problem, a solution, and benefits. And I said to myself, hey, you might be able to use that in your presentation to the council next week because you got to sell an idea. And this is a new idea. It's a little bit different from some of the other proposals that you've seen. So my approach to my version of the problem, solution, benefit today is going to be opportunity, strategy, and leverage. And those are the 3 points that I really want you to take away from this presentation. you might recall that in January 2020, my colleagues and I had the opportunity to present to the council about One Watershed, One Plan. And a lot's happened since then, so I'm going to quickly remind you that this program is about locally driven, prioritized, targeted, and measurable implementation on a watershed scale. And these plans are comprehensive, meaning that they address water quality, flooding, habitat, drinking water, groundwater, recreation, and other local priorities. So here's the opportunity. All of these plans contain RIM-eligible habitat protection activities that can work in combination with other water quality practices to address multiple goals. So this proposal, integrating habitat and clean water, is really designed to advance local habitat priorities through a Bowser-run RIM program that selects the best of the best based on the state priorities and stacked benefits for clean water and habitat. And we really want to emphasize habitat in implementation. And I have to tell you that we've got a lot of projects that are getting implemented right now that are a result of the completed plans, but they tend to have a pretty singular focus on water quality because we have an established funding mechanism through the Clean Water Fund to support implementation of these plans, but we don't have other established funding mechanisms to support habitat kinds of projects. So I'll just give you a quick example. A common agricultural practice in water quality is a water and sediment control basin. And these reduce phosphorus and sediment and associated downstream phosphorus, which is good for water quality, but WASCOBs, as they're known, are kind of a one-trick pony. They're missing an opportunity in terms of habitat, where a wetland project could get you both habitat and water quality benefits. But sometimes those are more difficult to implement, they're more expensive, they're harder to sell, they require easements and other kinds of work that are a little less straightforward for working with landowners sometimes. And so instead, we see an opportunity to offer a funding package that results in more of a treatment train style of approach, starting with uplands, with long-term habitat protection and restoration in forests and grasslands, and working downstream through the watershed to wetland and riparian areas, and finally, in-lake, in-stream water quality projects. And we have to remember that clean water is habitat. So we're really trying to generate more projects that habitat projects that benefit clean water and clean water projects that create habitat. And we really think this is an opportunity for the Outdoor Heritage Fund to be at the table in every single watershed. There are 49 partnerships right now of local and tribal governments across Minnesota that are participating in the One Watershed, One Plan program. And we ultimately expect to have 60 of those partnerships and statewide coverage with the program by the year 2025. And these groups are deeply engaged, spending a lot of time and effort in developing and implementing these local plans that are going to set the course of their implementation work on the local level over the coming decades. The legislature has appropriated so far $80 million in clean water funding over the past 3 biennia, with an ultimate goal of sustained funding comprising 60% of the Clean Water Fund overall going to implement these plans developed through the One Watershed, One Plan program. So this is really driving implementation at the local level. And we think that there's a really great opportunity to elevate habitat in those plans by establishing a corollary funding mechanism through this program. And so, a great example of what we want to see is one that you saw when I was here presenting in January 2020. My colleague, Melissa Barrick, with the Crow Wing Soil and Water Conservation District, talked about the Pine River Plan and the Leech Lake River Plan, where they're really truly integrating forest protection and habitat work with a water quality strategy and other clean water projects. And they've really taken the opportunity to tap into outdoor heritage funding. They've been successful in getting funding from this council to address both of those habitat and water quality goals. So that's one example of the kind of thing that we want to see more of these plans really taking on and doing. So that brings me to my second point, which is strategy. And as more of these plans come online and they're charting that 10-year course that's going to dictate how legacy funds are spent, I'm really confident that you're going to see more of the types of proposals that the Pine and Leach Group submitted to do habitat protection, because it's a priority in their plan. But there's not, so the challenge is that you're likely to see more of these kind of one-off projects. And again, I know a lot's happened since that meeting, but I want to bring you back to that conversation. And Chair Hartwell, that day, you asked me about Bowser's overall strategy for packaging up a variety of funding to implement these watershed plans. And you followed up by suggesting that Bowser think about how we could work together so that the council doesn't see a whole bunch of watersheds coming in with proposals saying we're the best, and no way for you all to determine really which ones best address our priorities statewide. And so we took that invitation, and here we are with this proposal, and we really think we're bringing the best of Bowser to you, RIM and One Watershed, One Plan, in a way that is streamlined, statewide, and systematic. And I want to unpack that for you. But I just want to say this definitely is different from most of the other proposals you're getting, because it's not about a specific piece of land or project, but we really think that it's worth considering. So this is a streamlined approach. It's going to reduce administrative burdens for local implementers, and we really think that an important role that Bowser can play is to lower or remove those administrative barriers, which are real time sucks, so local governments can do what they do best, which is implementation and working with landowners. This program is statewide. RIM is awesome, but RIM programs are limited in their footprint in Minnesota, and even the CREP program, which covered a good swath of the state, is a limited time opportunity. We want to build on those successes and expand the availability of these great programs. The approach is systematic. Just like other RIM programs, Bowser ranks and scores all the applications to ensure that the funding is going to the state's highest priorities. And as we've seen with our other existing RIM programs, local governments really like connecting landowners to Bowser because we can take on those easements. And the added twist of this project is that the scoring criteria are going to be matched with clean water projects in the same area. And that brings me to my third point, which is leverage. I want to acknowledge that in our proposal, we listed $0 as the amount of leverage that this program is going to bring in. And that's because where the projects get implemented is going to depend on local priorities and which local governments request funding. But I want to reassure you, the outdoor heritage funds spent through this new program are going to create huge leverage. And I want you to think about leverage in a variety of different ways. First, obviously, funding. All of the habitat projects through this approach are going to be matched with clean water funded work. And the $80 million that we've gotten so far in clean water funds is just one source for implementation. Each of the 10-year plans aspire to spend tens of millions of dollars from a variety of sources that they're building through partnerships with the state as well as federal governments, non-governmental organizations, landowners, and others. And they're building funding packages at the local level that address the suite of implementation in those local plans. The second kind of leverage I want you to think about is partnerships. These partnerships aren't just about money. As Melissa Barrick said in her presentation last January, a key role for local governments is to match landowners with the resources that they need to meet their goals. And so whether it's a non-government organization, federal, state, or local program, the partnerships are really critical in getting these things done, and local governments are really the best connection back to the landowners and the land. And finally, I just want to mention outcomes. It may be odd to talk about outcomes as a form of leverage, but recall that a key element of the One Watershed, One Plan program is measurable outcomes. And Melissa showed that example of setting a goal of 75% forest land protection in order to achieve water quality outcomes. This means that these watershed partnerships are really well positioned to quantify the effects of both the habitat and the water quality work that they're doing in ways that we've really never been able to do before, and to actually take credit in terms of water quality improvement for the habitat projects that are happening out there, and vice versa. So I think I've talked long enough today, and you've got a long day ahead of you, so I'm going to skip my closing story and just conclude by saying I think this new programmatic approach is a great opportunity for strategic funding mechanism for habitat priorities that raise multiple types of leverage, and we really hope you'll consider it, and we're happy to answer any questions. Sharon, do you have anything to add? Okay.
Questions?
Yeah, I got one.
Mark?
Mark Holston, thank you. Let me see if I can summarize what I thought I heard.
Okay.
RIM, in its current form, is water quality easement work that has habitat as a secondary incidental benefit. This would be RIM water quality with a concentration or emphasis around habitat and a habitat development plan on that parcel.
Sharon Doucette, easement section manager at Bowser. I would say that the One Watershed, One Plan concept right now is water quality driven. I would never say that about RIM. I think RIM has different purposes with different programs. Certainly we have clean water funded programs that are water quality driven, and we score and rank them appropriately. We have other RIM sub-programs that are definitely habitat driven, and those are scored and ranked in a completely different way, emphasizing the habitat benefits. The One Water, One Plan concept has been largely driven on a clean water concept because most of the funding has come from Clean Water Council in the past. The idea here is that folks like Crow Wing Soil and Water Conservation District and Melissa and her staff, they have seen the potential where habitat projects can have water quality benefits, and they've been writing those into their One Watershed, One Plan. By doing protection, by using the RIM program at the state level, they're accomplishing their water quality goals that they've laid out as their local priority in their One Watershed, One Plan.
Mr. Chair, water quality is essential. It's an important aspect of it, but I'm just trying to plug in, if I were to categorize what these projects were. RIM is water quality. That has ancillary habitat benefits in its practice. This is, as I thought I understood, maybe I'm not clear anymore, RIM with concentrated habitat benefits.
I'm not sure that I would agree with the first part of your statement. I don't think that RIM itself, the Reinvest in Minnesota Conservation Easement Program, is water quality focused. I certainly think the One Watershed, One Plan concept is. I think RIM has serves a lot of purposes in the state, water quality being one and habitat conservation being another. I think that this opportunity allows local partners to think about how habitat can help water quality and land planning, something that Crow Wing County and the SWCD there has done a fantastic job of. They have really looked at land use planning as one of the key features in their water quality benefits in that part of the state.
Jamie?
Jamie Becker-Finn. Like me before. So to clarify, we typically think of the RIM program as a water quality program, but partially that's because that's where more of the funding has come from, so that's how you've targeted more of those dollars? Because my understanding is that, like, you know, and I even like double checked and looked up, you know, like the definition, you know, RIM is just the name of the program that we use in Minnesota to acquire easements. Those easements might be focused as their number one thing on habitat protection, or they might be focused on water quality as the top priority. But because what you're saying is because historically more of your funding has come for water quality purposes, that has been what more of your projects have been. Am I getting this right?
Chair, council members, I would say that because our CREP agreement with the federal government was water quality focused, you know, that might be a key piece in how we think about RIM right now. Absolutely, that agreement with the federal government had water quality as its main focus.
So if you were to get funding from the Outdoor Heritage Council, which is habitat focused, then that would kind of shift it a bit to your number one focus being on the projects that, okay, thank you. She's nodding for the record.
Yes.
Jamie.
Jamie Swenson. So I'm curious, just to clarify, only watershed districts that have an approved plan would be eligible for this program, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so if I look at the map, are you anticipating then that all of the plans in development would actually be approved prior to the funding allocation?
Mr. Chair, Council, we're anticipating that the plans in development may be approved by the time this proposal is approved, but only the approved plans would be eligible. And I'll point out that we have additional watersheds that just lit up last week in terms of participating in the program, but those plans probably won't be done until 2023 or 2024.
One follow-up question. So it looks like not all the states is covered with approved plans.
Correct.
And I'm curious what type of feedback that you've received. I know we see a handful of proposals or requests from other watershed districts. Have you spoken to any of those directly? So, for example, Shell Rock River, Sauk River, Buffalo Red River, or Two Rivers, in regards to their support or lack of support for this project? Thank you.
That's a good question, and we have not reached out to them yet because we're still trying to formulate this idea. One of those folks, at least, is in the room today, so it's probably not fair to put Courtney on the spot, but you know, I think those groups that are applying for the funding, the watershed districts, are really high performers in the state, and they have the capacity to go after these kinds of funds. And local governments these local partnerships don't always include watershed districts. And so sometimes they just don't have the local capacity to put together and manage a proposal to this council in ways that a funding mechanism through Bowser might be a lot easier for them to tap into the funding.
Ashley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just hoping you could state a little bit more about how you work at the local level. We try to make sure that a lot of the projects have very local county level support, and I heard a lot about state and federal support, so I was just hoping you could say a little bit more about that.
Sure, Mr. Chair and Council, these projects are going to be identified through locally developed comprehensive watershed management plans. So the starting point is a plan that was developed through a partnership that includes county board members, soil and water conservation district supervisors, and watershed district managers where watershed districts exist. So only those local priorities that already have buy-in from the county board, for example, would be advanced through this program. Yep.
So I'm wondering if you can talk about the scalability of your project. I noticed that you say the staffing cannot be scalable, which seems wrong to me. And I'd like you to address why it can't be scalable. If we give you $2 million, you're gonna spend the same on staffing as if we give you $5 million, which means less money going into the project and more into staff, which seems like we're funding not the Habitat project, but a staffing project.
Thank you, Chair Hartwell. Members of the council, Sharon Doucette again, I can take that. And to be perfectly honest, that's just really poor wording choice on our part. Certainly our personnel is scalable to the size of the project. What we try to point out in that language, and I realize now it did not do a very good job of it, is that while certainly our acquisition staff who do the mapping and writing of our legals and our agreements and our easements, that portion of our work is absolutely scalable. If any of our projects have engineering, because this will come up again, it was not the only time Chair Hartwell made the comment, it applies to all Bowser projects. You know, engineering is certainly scalable based on the number of projects that they're working on. The one thing that we don't feel is proportionately scalable sometimes is, you know, a $2 million appropriation and a $5 million appropriation still require a certain level of work from our more administrative staff on the reporting mechanisms, on the fiscal setup of the funds, tracking the funds. So while that is scalable, it's not proportional in the same way that our other staffing is.
Thank you for addressing that. Other questions? Good enough. Thanks for coming today. Next is HA04, Protecting Cold Water Fisheries on Minnesota's North Shore.
Sure. Oh, there we go. Mr. Chair, council members, good to see all of you in person. I'm Chris Larson, Executive Director of the Minnesota Land Trust, and with me is Pat Collins. Some of you will remember Pat, who was with the DNR for many years, came to work for the Minnesota Land Trust for several years, and has now been on leave with the DNR for 3 years, and is coming back to the Minnesota Land Trust to help on this program. So it's exciting to have Pat back. This is day 2 of his new return, so please be kind to him. We'd like him to come back on day 3. But we're thrilled to have him. And part of the reason to bring Pat back is for the prior investments that you all have recommended for the cold water fisheries program. So we really hope to use Pat's skills and talents to gear up this effort. I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about where we've been in terms of past funding and success. Pat will give a refresher and overview about why these cold water fisheries matter and how we can help protect them. And then I'll wrap up with a few specifics on the proposal. But first, I just want to thank you for the prior investments you made in Habitat in Northeast Minnesota. As you see on the sheet that's coming around, the council has recommended funding for 5 previous appropriations to our critical shorelands program and 1 appropriation for the first phase of this cold water fisheries program for the North Shore. And the reason we're talking about both of those is, if you'll recall, this proposal was born out of a strategic decision to split the critical shorelands program into 2 different programs. One that's focused on inland lakes that you helped fund last year, and then this proposal on cold water fisheries on the North Shore. And the reason, again, we did that is to try to compare inland lakes to North Shore trout streams or Lake Superior shoreline is very difficult, and especially when you use a ranking system like ours where we want to kind of compare apples to apples, this became a much more effective and strategic way to do that, to break out the cold water fisheries on the North Shore. So that's why you see both of those. In terms of how we've performed in those 2 different programs, if you look at the North Shore area itself for the Critical Shorelands Program, we've completed 13 projects to date, and that represents more than 14 miles of shoreline and nearly 2,500 acres of associated habitat. So it's been very successful, and if you look at the Critical Shorelands Program overall to date, we've protected 32 projects and achieved 125% of our goal. So it's been a really effective program. I thank you for that. We've been able to get great work done on the ground. And I think one of the selling points for us on this program, it is, I think, our most highly leveraged program when it comes to getting landowner contributions and donations. So for every dollar of state funding, we've been able to leverage that with $1 or more of landowner donation. So very cost effective for the state. We are excited to continue this strategy in this proposal, and we just think this is such an important and iconic place within the state, and we have an opportunity now to do something before it's too late. So with that, Pat, I'll hand it over to you to talk a little bit more about the science behind this.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chair Hartwell and members of the council. The North Shore streams, as you probably know, are really driven by overland flow of water, typically from wetlands and adjacent lands. This means that temperature in those streams is much more influenced by land cover than, say, trout streams in southeastern Minnesota, where there's much more of a groundwater component. So this cold, highly oxygenated water is really key to the survival of trout and other species of invertebrates and fish that really rely on these cold water ecosystems. Some recent modeling by Minnesota Sea Grants really shown that stream water temperature on the North Shore is driven by three main variables: the amount of forest cover on headwater wetlands, the amount of development in these areas, and the average air temperature. And this proposal can really help address the first two of these, the forest cover and the development, the two things that we really have our hands on the levers that we can have some control over. So in these streams, winter ice really acts like an ice cube that lowers the peak flow and extends this pulse of cold water and cold temperatures later into the spring and summer. That really helps ensure the survival and growth of young fish. And the shade from long-lived conifers is really responsible for extending this ice cover and snow cover into the later spring and early parts of the warmer seasons. Protecting forested lands in the upland parts of the watershed and in the wetlands, and restoring long-lived conifers to the lowland areas that are hydraulically connected to the streams really can improve the temperature resiliency of trout communities, trout streams, and improve conditions for a wide variety of other cold water, cold weather adapted wildlife. So this also includes iconic species like moose, Canada lynx, snowshoe hare. And the North Shore trout streams really represent one of Minnesota's iconic and natural resources that's most threatened by climate change. But we have a window of opportunity to act now to improve that resiliency. And if we care about the health of these systems, we really need to focus on those levers that we can control: land use and land cover within the headwaters and the shorelines.
Thanks, Pat. Kind of to wrap up, this proposal, phase one that we're in now, although you see on your sheet doesn't look like much has been spent, we have projects that will fully burn through that first phase, so that's why we're back for a second phase. And this proposal, again, would be to complete 2 miles of shoreline and 840 acres through conservation easements. One thing I wanted to point out on the sheet that we spread around is the kind of strategic targeting that we're intending to do through this. So if you can see the example watersheds, these are just some of the lower watersheds on the North Shore. This RAC system, which stands for the Riparian Adjacency and Quality scoring system, you've seen this before through Bowser. This is really a way to get at what is the best of the best when it comes to our riparian lands. You can see in that two things. One is that everything except for that kind of forest service green there is privately owned. So although a lot of the North Shore, as we know, has a lot of public lands, when you look at the trout streams themselves, especially in those lower watersheds, the majority of that is in private ownership. So if we want to protect those, we have to work with private landowners, and that's what this proposal will do. And then the second thing, I think, is really looking at how we can get qualitatively, the red being the best of the best. We have places now that we can target and rank using our scoring system that's in the proposal to really elevate the highest quality projects, and then again, those with the greatest leverage. So that scoring system would help get there strategically. I think it's important to note too, we talk a lot about the fisheries, but this proposal has great benefits for all kinds of other habitat on the North Shore, for migratory birds, et cetera. This has multiple benefits, although we're talking more specifically about trout and water quality here. Finally, I think when you look at this proposal, it's also an urgent time when we look at the opportunity. We have landowners that are interested, and as you've seen and heard about some of the more rapid development pace that's been on the North Shore in the last year, particularly, it's time to act now to try to preserve some of these. That development pressure that's been on the North Shore is pushing inland into the river systems, and a few ill-placed developments can have really significant impacts on the headwaters and on the trout streams. So with that, thanks again for your prior investments, and we'll stand for any questions.
Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tom Sachs. Chris, you know, what's happened with our rainfall and such in the last year, would some of the programs that you're talking about doing and have done, would they affect in a positive way any of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, Mr.
I mean,
Chair.
I know there's
yeah.
some bodies of water, rivers that are almost dry, that aren't even emptying into Lake Superior.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, members, and Pat, I'll let you follow up on Mike because you'll probably correct me, but I think it even demonstrates in these low water times how even more important it is to make sure that we have that land cover and forest cover that's there, because if you think about warming and you only have smaller pockets now where the fish are concentrating because of that low water, that even further concentrates the ability for the warming temperature. So I'd say this would have positive impact on trying to maintain those even in low water, and maybe especially in low water time. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's a really good summary, and I think it also is useful to point out the really critical importance of these larger headwater wetlands at times like this when we have really low rainfall, low precipitation. So our headwater wetlands that have tended to have relatively low protection in the past because we've kind of figured that they've been pretty safe from development, and that's turning out not so much to be the case, but they're really critical to protect in times of really severe drought.
Thank you.
Other questions? Jamie?
Jamie Swenson, can you speak a little bit in regards to the timing and importance of funding now? And does the current protection priority or the ranking system take into account potential loss if it doesn't happen now?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members, I think to directly answer your first part, this is more, it doesn't take into account, say, urgent sales or anything like that. So it really is more about where is the best of the best habitat. And so that isn't so much an urgency indicator, except that when you can start seeing how much there is and how important it is, we would say that's urgent, because when you look at the highest quality, we know that we need to get to those now because they are of a scale that could be developed or impacted in the future. And I would say that part of the importance of this is momentum. So thank you for the first phase. Part of this is building on that first phase, being able to do the things that Pat will be doing now that he's on board, and that's coordinating with all the other conservation partners. It is doing the outreach to landowners. And so keeping that momentum is important, because if you're doing it, and then you drop and you're not able to do that again, remobilizing, just like any construction project or house project, takes a long time and effort. So momentum is key.
One follow-up if I can. And so I read through the ranking system and just I think I understand it's focused on the highest quality current habitat. It's not looking at areas of the watershed or areas within that stream corridor that are currently negatively impacting the streams and going to try and fix those areas. It's focused just on the high quality. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members, that is correct on the ranking system, but I should point out in phase one we did have some restoration money. I would expect in the future we'd be looking for some restoration money, because even within that ranking system, we might have properties that there is an opportunity to do some restoration or enhancement work. And, you know, largely the reason we want to act now is because the North Shore streams are still pretty intact and the forest system's pretty intact. But as we know, there have been impacts and there's a chance to do some restoration work. So I'd say it's a little bit of both and where we see the opportunity to do that. But you're right, in terms of that ranking system, it really does focus on where's the best of the best today.
Other questions? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you. Enjoy your day.
Coming today. Next is HA05, Southeast Minnesota Protection and Restoration Phase 10.
Is this on? Yes, it appears to be. Good morning, Mr. Chair, council members, staff. We are delighted to be here. My name is Bob McGillivray, and I'm with the Trust for Public Land. And I have Rich Biskey with the Nature Conservancy to my right, and Wayne Osley to my left with the Minnesota Land Trust, and also Mark Vanderlinden with the Minnesota Land Trust to my far right. Thank you for the opportunity to present our proposal and update you on progress on your past investments to protect, restore, and enhance habitat in southeast Minnesota's driftless area. As many of you know, the southeast blufflands with its scenic bluffs, valleys, and trout streams is a very unique part of the state. It is Minnesota's most diverse, biodiverse region, and it's home to more species and greatest conservation need than anywhere else in the state. It also provides quality habitat for many game species and fish, providing excellent recreation opportunities for hunters and anglers, many of whom come from metropolitan areas. And yet, this area has less than 5% of its land protected and open to the public. Our goals are to effectively conserve priority habitat complexes throughout southeastern Minnesota that allow for restoration and enhancement at a landscape scale, and that improve public access for hunting, fishing, bird watching, and other recreation through fee acquisition. We further seek to expand these habitat complexes and corridors with conservation easements and ecologically sound restoration and enhancement practices. We use a targeted approach supporting conservation plans developed with stakeholders. I'll say a few words about our impact to date. Thanks to the Outdoor Heritage Fund, this partnership is making a significant impact through strategic investments in key complexes, implementing the State Wildlife Action Plan and the Forest Action Plan. These investments meet the interests of other partners within the region by increasing public access for hunting and fishing, while making it possible to manage diverse habitats across ownership boundaries, to restore prairies, savannas, and maintain them with prescribed fire. This program has exceeded the proposed outcomes, continues to deliver conservation results, and has demonstrated demand and opportunity that significantly exceeds the funds that have been awarded. Our results to date have included total protection of 8,645 acres, comprised of 4,915 acres of fee title acquired and 3,730 acres of high-quality conservation easements, and we have protected over 30 miles of trout stream. Our results also include 1,961 acres of restoration and enhancement activities, including clearing brush from bluff prairies, floodplain forest planting, prairie restoration, and oak savanna clearing. With respect to leverage, to date, this program has leveraged nearly $4.5 million of private and federal funding, including over $1.2 million from landowner donations. But beyond the acres conserved, it's important to note that this program has built protected complexes of high-quality habitat. If you turn to the handout that we've given you, you can see an example of how this program is protecting, enhancing, and restoring complexes, like the one that you'll see on the handout that is just south of Rushford, Minnesota. For each of the past 7 years or so, we've added new parcels and restored new tracts to this complex. This is one of the advantages of funding a continuing program, the ability to build larger complexes over time. Complexes like this have become recreation destinations, helping meet the public's demand for areas in which to hunt and fish. And for example, a recent acquisition had 16 vehicles in the parking lot when it was first posted. Turning to our current proposal, the size of our request this year reflects an increased demand from users and landowners we've generated within the habitat complexes we've been working in, and a recognition in the opportunity and need for more conservation action in the region. Additionally, we have committed most of the funds from previous appropriations. Our goal for this phase is to continue to work effectively, conserve the region's most viable priority habitat complexes, and we propose the following partnership activities. For protection, we request funding to complete an additional 3,405 acres, and many of these parcels are adjacent to tracts already recently protected with outdoor heritage funds. With respect to restoration and enhancement, this year we are proposing to continue to increase these activities. we propose an additional 1,437 acres of restoration and enhancement of bluff prairie, savanna restoration, and forest enhancement. We'll continue to seek federal funds to leverage this work to achieve more conservation on more acres. And it's also worth noting that the driftless area is considered to be climate resilient, and our restoration efforts help sustain this. In summary, this partnership is working well in a region of Minnesota that desperately needs additional protection and enhancement. We now have the opportunity in the coming year to make a significant impact in this region, and with your support, we can. I thank you very much for your previous support of this program and for the opportunity to present to you today, and we'll welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Questions? Looks like you did a good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is HAO6, Mississippi Headwaters Habitat Corridor Project Phase 7.
When you're ready, just introduce yourself and we'll get started.
Yes, now we're on. Okay, good morning, Mr. Chair, wherever he went, and council members. I'm Paula West. I am the project coordinator for the Mississippi Headwaters Habitat Corridor Project. I'm with the Mississippi Headwaters Board. And on behalf of our project partners, the Mississippi Headwaters Board, the Trust for Public Land, the Board of Water and Soil Resources, and 7 Headwaters Soil and Water Conservation Districts, we thank you for the opportunity this morning to present our proposal for Phase 7 of this project. With me today is Tim Terrell on my right, the Executive Director of the Mississippi Headwaters Board, and Bob McGilvery, Senior Project Manager with the Trust for Public Land. And Sharon Doucette is in the audience from Bowser if there's any questions related to that component of our project. With this Phase 7, we are proposing to protect more than 7 miles of critical aquatic habitat and 3,850 acres of high-quality forested wildlife habitat along the first 400 miles of the Mississippi River, which is considered the headwaters of the Mississippi River. To achieve this permanent land conservation, we've been utilizing fee title acquisitions with and without PILT, and rim conservation easements. And I'd like to point out, relative to the previous discussion about rim easements, that these easements are specifically targeted at habitat quality, not clean water, although of course we get clean water benefits with those easements. So with these tools, we are protecting critical shoreland along the river and some of its major tributaries, and also creating upland habitat protection corridors and complexes. Some of the additional benefits from the program are reduced forest fragmentation, enhanced public recreational opportunities along the Mississippi corridor, and protection of water quality, which is critical to the millions of people downstream who rely on the Mississippi River for drinking water. Strong relationships with local governments have been formed through this program through a very transparent policy that informs the local government about potential fee acquisition projects, gets their permission to continue with due diligence, keeps them informed along the whole process, and then comes back to the local government for final approval before land is actually conveyed. To date, this project has been extremely successful. We've exceeded our accomplishment plan goals by over 250%. Permanent habitat protection has been completed on over 4,000 acres of land and 34 miles of Mississippi River shoreland. This has included 24 easements, 2 additions to a state forest, 2 additions to a county forest, the creation of a new 300-plus acre WMA, and a recent addition to that WMA, and 1 addition to an existing AMA. We currently have 22 conservation easements in process with Bowser, or the SWCDs have signed landowner commitments, all of which have been approved by our project technical team. These will protect an additional 2,200 acres and 11 miles of shoreline. I'd like to point out that all of the easement money that you have appropriated to us through 2020, which would be phase 5, has been used or committed, is now committed to conservation easements. And we are now signing up landowners for conservation easements that will be funded with the ML21 money, phase 6, that has just been appropriated as of July 1st. We have several large fee title acquisitions that are in process, and they would utilize all the remaining fee title acquisition funds, including the ML21 funds and new funds that you may recommend to us. Please take note that this project is current with the money that you've already appropriated to us, and there are still willing landowners waiting to participate. This success would not have been possible without the cooperation and the partnerships with local soil and water conservation districts and local governments. For additional leverage, the Bowser has made available to us $1 million in RIM buffer money for conservation easements particular to this Habitat Corridor project. These are large easements that are primarily on the main stem of the Mississippi River. And there are 5 of them in process now that when they are completed, an additional 1,000 acres and 6 miles of permanently protected shoreline will be along the Mississippi Headwaters Corridor. We've used a science-based process all along through all the phases to identify and screen potential parcels for protection. And we have a technical team of our project partners plus representatives from the Minnesota DNR and the Nature Conservancy that review each of the parcels that are brought forward against a set of very specific and rigorous criteria. And this also includes the RAC scoring that you've heard about before, which includes as one of its components a parcel's adjacency to current public and privately protected lands. And this is a very critical criteria because taking private land and protecting it next to public land creates these large contiguous habitat corridors that we are continuing to build on. And these are important to wildlife because they need large areas to seek food and shelter, to raise their young, and to have protection from predators, and also to roam around in during various life stages. If you have your notebook and the project illustration that we provided, there's an example there of one of these habitat complexes, in specifically the Indian Jack Lake complex, where a 320 acre WMA was created that contains almost all of the shoreline of Indian Jack Lake. The other part of the shoreline is owned by the state. And we've recently added an addition to that AMA that will provide access for the public to 2 miles of the Mississippi River. The DNR is going to be developing a parking lot that will allow public access to the river frontage part of that WMA as well. We have 2 conservation easements that append to this now public land, and together this forms a complex of 594 acres, 2.5 miles of shoreland, and 3 miles of river shoreland for both wildlife and fisheries protection and increased public recreation. As Bob was saying in his previous presentation, we continue to build on these complexes as we add more landowners that are interested in the project. So this map is just one example of how fee title acquisitions and conservation easements purchased by this project and adjacent to public land can create large, contiguous, permanently protected habitat for fish and wildlife, and enhanced public recreation. We have similar complexes that have been built along the river in Aiken County and in Crow Wing County, and also along the Platte River, a major tributary in Morrison County. In closing, I want to assure the council that any funds recommended for Phase 7 of this Mississippi Headwaters Habitat Corridor project will be utilized in the near future, as there continues to be state and local government and landowner interest in participating in this project. I believe the accomplishments that I presented here today speak for themselves in providing you with that assurance that continued support from the council will result in continued success in habitat protection within the Mississippi River Corridor. And with that, we'll take any questions that you might have.
Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tom Sachs. Ms. West, with this is a kind of a specific question, but it's my question is about wild rice. Have we seen some real benefits and improvements with what's happened on the upper Mississippi? And I realize this may or may not be a good time for wild rice, but just in the habitat that is good for it?
We don't have any specific quantification of how much wild rice has been protected, but certainly along the Mississippi River, there's a tremendous amount of wild rice. And so with the protection of this shoreline, we're also getting wild rice protection, as well as protecting grasslands and wetlands along the river too. So,
you know, I've had some benefit of kayaking the Mississippi River in Cass County, specifically where that wild rice is, and by Cass Lake, and definitely just going through there. There were some easements we got in Cass County that had protected shoreline on the Mississippi that had an abundance of wild rice there. So I'm glad to see that that is working.
And there's on the Indian Jack Lake WMA that's illustrated in the handout, there is wild rice on that lake. So that's been some protection that we've helped for wild rice.
Thank you.
Jamie?
So this is actually ends up being sort of related, but you know, you talked a lot about working with local governments in that area of the state, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about working with the tribes and the treaty lands that are impacted in that area.
We have not specifically worked directly with the tribal bands in the area, but we're certainly open to that opportunity should there be any interest expressed.
Well, that's a huge oversight. When we're talking about local governments, we're talking about government to government work, we absolutely need to include our tribal governments, and being very familiar with that part of the Mississippi as someone who grew up in the Cass Lake area, that's really unfortunate. It's really a lost opportunity to learn more about the area, and I'm disappointed to hear that, and I hope that all the other presenters who are here are listening as well, because it's just really disappointing to hear that that's
Sure.
been an oversight with this project, because I don't necessarily I like the project, and I like the work. You know, the headwaters of the Mississippi is very important to me, you know, just personally as someone who grew up in that area, but I'm pretty astounded that that was the answer, to be honest.
Mr. Chair and members of the board, the Mississippi Headwaters Board has a formal agreement with the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe at a institutional level to work together recently, and this isn't on this project, but on another project, we provided them money to build or plant habitat in an area in which I think that they owned, and they're going to plant some native grasses, not using any fertilizer. So we are starting to, in a concrete way, not in this program. Of course, it is available for them to work with, but in other programs, we're rebuilding that relationship and working with them. And I see as we look at strategic planning in the future, I see the tribe from an organizational level working more with us on some of these programs, because they definitely, we want to promote and work with all the partners, because we're always stronger when we're working with more partners than we are just doing things by ourselves. Thank you.
And this would be my final follow-up, Mr. Chair, but I just, we've got to do better, and I would encourage folks to, if you know, it sounds like there's some lack of education and understanding maybe a little bit about, you know, maybe where the treaty boundaries are and sort of what our obligations are when we're within the treaty boundaries and not just the reservation boundaries. I know the state has come a long way in training, tribal state relations training and other trainings, and I would encourage you to reach out to the DNR and other folks who have experience with that.
If I may add, so far we've been, you know, working with local units of government when we're acquiring land within their boundaries, and I certainly apologize if we have not involved the tribes in our work in that way. Representative Becker-Finn, would you be willing to meet with us to discuss best ways that we might involve the tribes in our work?
Absolutely, but I would also say that it is not the obligation of Native folks to kind of keep y'all in check. So to just sort of, you know, I'd be more than happy to make those connections with you and to help out how I can. But again, that's a burden that many BIPOC folks have to carry, is that, you know, it's not my job to make sure that you folks are educated. You know, that's sort of on you, but would be more than happy to sit down and talk about how we can do better.
We would greatly appreciate if you could help point us in the right direction. Thank you.
Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to mention very briefly that this is a great project. I care a lot about the headwaters as well, and Mississippi for its habitats and conservation purposes. But I'm very glad to see that there was mention of protection for clean drinking water for millions of Minnesotans. As the council and others may be aware, Mississippi is upstream from a whole lot of us who rely on that source for our drinking water in Minneapolis and the entire metro. So I appreciate that being mentioned, even though that's not the core focus of our work here. It's a critical aspect of this proposal. Thank you.
Josh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question for any of the presenters that might want to chime in on that. Is there any group or organization that you are not willing to work with in the state of Minnesota?
I guess as the executive director, I mean, we definitely want to work with people and organizations, because if we have the same goals and mission, that makes a lot of sense to bring people in. I'm not afraid to cold call someone and just talk. In fact, that's how I met with a tribe member of the tribe or staff member, is just talking. I talked with the tribal council, which was a first for me, and it was really encouraging to see that we could partner on one project. And I really see that, you know, working with them and, you know, new experiences, new beginnings lead to new opportunities. And, you know, as long as you have a common vision, diversity is a strength. It's not a weakness. And so as the Mississippi Headwaters Board, we're constantly pushing ourselves to meet new people and get new opportunities to protect the Mississippi River.
Mr. Chair, follow-up? Actually, it's more of a comment, and it is somewhat of a response to Representative Becker-Finn's comments. I think it's pretty obvious that this organization, as well as probably any organization that is presenting today, is open and willing and very eager to work with any organization or group around the entire state. And it seems very aggressive to suggest otherwise. There, in this particular case, stating that publicly, and I think virtually any other organization or presenter here today would feel the same. I can't speak for them. But I would, just after listening and working with numerous folks that are in the audience today, I've seen a constant willingness to be there for any organization or group and to collaborate on issues that are relevant to this group's goals as well as any others. So I don't know if there's some misunderstanding or why those comments are being made, but I really feel it was inappropriate.
Mr. Chair, if I may respond, I think there is, you aren't understanding what the point is. The point is not that these folks aren't willing to talk with people. The point is that a tribal government and a tribal nation has rights legally, and there are impacts, and they aren't just like any other organization. And if an organization is going to look at a parcel of land that falls within treaty lands or within reservation boundaries, in the same way that if you were going to take action on a piece of land that is in a county, it would make sense that you would interact with that tribal government. I am not ascribing any sort of intentional, desire to do harm or anything like that. I am, and as I stated, I rank this pretty high. I don't have any problem with this, but I wasn't expecting that answer. Certainly, I was hoping I would get a better answer, and I think, frankly, it's a problem to ascribe aggression when a Native person points out a way that we could do better. And I think that's entirely appropriate, and frankly, the idea that it would somehow be out of line for me to try to help our organizations do better and to point out where our failings are is really, that itself is a problem. But I'm not trying to say that these folks here are bad people, but I'm not saying that about anybody here. But the point is that we often forget about our tribal governments and the rights that exist there. And I ask the question, because I know there's some overlap with where the focus of where they're doing these projects. And I think that's the whole point of us being here, is to ask these questions and for folks to learn from the types of questions we ask. So I'm really glad this came up, because I think it's a good learning opportunity for everybody, including members of the council and everyone here. And I thank you guys for being willing to take feedback, because that's why you're here. That's why we do this work and why it's a public hearing. So I think it's entirely appropriate that I ask those questions and that we have a dialogue about this, and I'm glad that we have.
So I'd like to ask you a question about your proposal, which mentioned DNR forestry involvement. We had discussions earlier this year about more trails and roads on DNR forestry projects, which was very disturbing to me. And I'm wondering what your commitment is and working relationship is with DNR forestry. If projects that you do end up in their ownership, will there be more roads and trails on that property?
I'll address that. We are working with DNR Forestry on some acquisitions, and it is the intent that, based on the discussions that we have, that those lands that would be acquired would be managed the same way other state forest lands are. I'm not aware of any plans for new trails on those properties, but they would be managed like other state forest land.
Okay, so they'd be open for more roads and trails if they were forestry projects. Thank you. Other questions? Great, thank you guys for coming in. We'll move on to HA07, Shell Rock River Watershed Habitat Restoration Program, Phase 11. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chairman Hartwell and council members, for the opportunity to present to you today our Phase 11 Habitat Restoration Program proposal. My name is Courtney Phillips, and I'm a program and project manager at the Shell Rock River Watershed District. Along with me, I have Andy Henschel, who is our district administrator. The projects before you today are part of a phased $20 million watershed-wide effort to protect, restore, and enhance habitat in our watershed. The habitat restoration proposal is requesting $3,604,600 of total funding from the Lessard-Sams Council that are critical for the benefit of fish, waterfowl, and wildlife, reversing the trend of wetland loss and habitat degradation. Since our establishment in 2003, the district has implemented or is in the process of implementing projects totaling over $30 million. Of that $30 million, a little over a third has been appropriated to us by you, the Lessard-Sams Council, and for that we're very thankful. With that funding, we have completed and expended all funds for our Headwaters property purchase, our Albert Lee Lake Dam and Fish Barrier Passage, and our Wedge, White, and Fountain Lake Fish Barriers. We're also going to be closing out Phase 4 and Phase 5 allocations the end of this month, and we are continuing to work on our Phase 6 through Phase 10 allocations. If you could please refer to the handout that was passed out, it has project-specific statuses for each of the phases of funding, so it can give you an idea of what's being completed and what's already completed. We've come a long way, but we still have a lot of priority resources that need action, leading to this Phase 11 proposal. The Habitat Restoration Program consists of 3 significant goals that work together to make it a great project. That includes habitat restoration projects are targeted to restore wetlands and native vegetation, improving nesting habitat and waterfowl food sources. Second, our lake management practices will improve a system of shallow lakes and wetlands and uses a variety of best management practices to maintain and enhance game fish populations, improve waterfowl and nesting habitat. And third is native species restoration efforts will complement the many acres of habitat that's acquired and lake management practices. In project detail, this proposal accelerates investments to protect, enhance, and restore habitat identified through the district's planning process for our watershed. A lot of these projects align with the Lessard-Sams Prairie ecoregion vision and priorities. And in detail, our projects include protection efforts of $1,439,500, and that includes our Church Lake acquisition. This acquisition actually results as of our Phase 8 proposal, and in our Phase 8 proposal, we purchased 80 acres to protect oak savanna and intermittent marshlands. As a result of that funding, a landowner actually came to us who owns land who borders that site. They liked the initiative, wanted to get on board, and now they're offering 22-acre parcel that they own next to it to increase the parcel size of this property. So this is also going to have oak savannas and intermittent marshlands on it that are going to be further protecting the site. Next, we have our Eberhart Lake property. This is a 60-acre acquisition for habitat and shoreline. It's going to be creating upland native prairie plantings as well as wetland restoration to overall increase the habitat carrying capacity on the west side of our watershed district. We also have our Olson property. This is a 150-acre site that a family came to us wanting to take their row crop agriculture and put it back into native wildflowers and grasses and prairies, benefiting songbirds and pollinators alike. The important part about this parcel is it includes about 30 acres of a historic oak stand that is in dire need of protection. It actually has an overwintering population of white-tailed deer, and we want to keep that in permanent protection. Next, we have our enhancement efforts of $992,500, and that includes our Bancroft Stream enhancement. This stream habitat improvement improves the condition of habitat by regrading shorelines and stabilizing areas while incorporating habitat for fish, amphibians, and waterfowl. Currently, we have sediment that's being eroded and smothering fish eggs and the insects that fish eat. So while regrading these erosion areas while also installing woodied buried material, we're improving the shoreline while incorporating habitat benefits. Next, we have our Bryceland Wetland Enhancement. This is another project that is, again, leveraging existing funds and partnerships. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service purchased 171 acres of property and is now known as their IC&E Wetland Waterfowl Production Area. With previous Lessard-Sams funding, which was our Phase 6 proposal, we were able to purchase an additional 80 acres that borders that site to now include a total parcel of 250 acres. As a result of this, landowners caught wind, and we now have a neighboring landowner who wants to do wetland restoration and enhancement, as well as planting native property on their area. So again, furthering those partnerships and collaboration of previous Lessard-Sams funding. We have our Fountain Lake Shoreline Enhancement Project. This project will create spawning habitat, cover and refuge for fish, and habitat for wildlife, and will restore the growth of healthy aquatic vegetation. This is in the habitat area-driven area of Fountain Lake. This project aligns with the Lessard-Sams priorities for enhancing shallow lake productivity, all while protecting area for our endangered species such as our Blandings turtle. We have our South Shore Enhancement Project. This is a 40-acre enhancement project that's a tributary to Albert Lee Lake. Historically, this was northern pike spawning habitat, but a blown dike that was built in the 80s needs to be replaced so that we can once again have reproductive success for our game fish populations. We have restoration efforts of $1,081,600, and that includes our Pickerel Lake upland restoration. Located along Pickerel Lake, this is going to be a great mecca for wildlife with 191 acres up for restoration, which is currently in row crop agriculture. Being able to do wetland restoration and native upland plantings, this property is going to benefit anything from as small as a bumblebee to as big as a white-tailed buck. So this provides a perfect oasis for animals while being in close proximity to a lake source. Wetland scrapes would also be implemented to reduce competition among the site for waterfowl. We have our Olson and our Eberhardt restoration project. This includes about 20 acres of wetland restoration with additional 20 acres of vegetation establishment. Project outcomes include restoration to remove invasive and noxious species, to provide an adequate habitat buffer around our local lakes, and to increase habitat breeding success. The first phase of this project will be to acquire the property while implementing wetland restoration as the funds allow. In closing, our proposal directly addresses the needs identified by the statewide conservation plan for shallow lakes, wetland, and wetland-associated watersheds. We've also designed our plan for this habitat restoration program to be in line with plans for managing shallow lakes for waterfowl and wildlife. We look forward to continuing our efforts to protect, restore, and enhance habitat located in our great state of Minnesota, and we're here to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions? Ashley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ashley Peters. I was just hoping you could say a little bit more about the urgency. We've got a lot of projects in front of us that are working with landowners, and that was the primary reason cited in the proposal. So just wanted to hear a little bit more about specifically with the habitat and wildlife, what the urgency is there.
Great question, and thank you. Council members, one of the things that we deal with when we're working with landowners is almost every single one of these projects, these landowners have came to our office and requested that their program be funded. And not very often do you have landowners knocking at our door. A lot of times landowners can get frustrated if the process takes a long time. So the urgency is always dire. We've had instances where we've been working with a landowner and they pass away, unfortunately, and their children are no longer have the same initiatives as they do. So when we have willing landowners, we always need to be able to act on it as quickly as we can.
Ryan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'm a big fan of any of these projects in the southern half of the state because it's a very abused part of our state. Maybe I just answered my own question. You're a little confused by your chart here. It looks to me like, but maybe you got $7 million yet that hasn't been spent, and before you get this one, you're pretty sure this is all going to go? I mean, from phase 6 on, you got $7 million sitting there yet.
Yes, and again, thank you, Council and Councilman Shara. All these projects you see here in front of you are committed. So the funds are committed to all these projects. I think that's one of the unique things with the Watershed District is, you know, we come with you with specific projects, and we wouldn't be here if we didn't have commitments from landowners or other agencies to do these projects. So yes, all of these projects are committed to. I will say, I know some of the questions in the past have been, you know, why is this money still sitting out there? What I can say to that is for the complexity of these projects, some of them, also the district is a public entity. So all these projects have to go through a public process on our end. So all of these projects go to our board approves it. We have to have a public hearing for these projects. We have to have engineer recommendations. So it does take us time to turn around projects. Some of the other complexities or challenges that we face are some of these projects are waiting for bigger projects that are ahead of them to finish up before we can complete those. So there's two main projects on here. One is the in-lake habitat for Fountain Lake. That project is actually waiting for the dredge project to finish up, which will finish up this fall. So yes, all this money is committed to the projects that you see in this list.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Quick question in regards to the One Watershed, One Plan. It looks like you either have started that process or finished that process somewhere in between maybe. In regards to the Bowser proposal for the integrated habitat and clean water, are you excited at the opportunity to funnel your request through that program and get rid of some of the administrative responsibilities, or would you be still submitting your own proposal?
For myself, and sorry, but thank you for the question. And council, I think for us, we've always have had the privilege to come to the council and request funds for our local projects. This is the first I've heard about Bowser wanting to request funds from LSOHC to go to Bowser and then be funneled through to other organizations. I think as a watershed district, again, we have, again, our local projects that we know are priority for us. We know the urgencies for them. As far as the administrative piece, our staff, the watershed district has a staff of 5. I have 1 financial tech, an administrative assistant, a conservation tech, a program manager, and myself. We have no issues with the administrative portion of this. I think it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty streamlined, working with the DNR on whether it be land acquisitions or reimbursements. So I don't see a big need, and I don't see a big load on agencies that receive this funding for administrative purposes.
I will like to add, being a program and project manager, I see projects from start to finish, and I think it really works with having that landowner interaction, that knowing that that landowner can call me and I can tell them where we're at in the specific process and say, this is where we're at, we're waiting for an appraisal, or we're waiting for the appraisal review, not let me contact another agency and get back to you. And I think that's important. It may be beneficial for some watershed districts, but there are very many that are capable of doing it themselves.
Other questions? Great, thank you for coming this morning. Thank you. Next is HA08, DNR, WMA, and SNA, DNR, WMA, and SNA acquisition, phase 14.
I had problems with the remote testimony, but I'm getting a little quicker. Good morning, Chair Hartwell, members. My name is Jay Johnson. I'm the WMA Acquisition Coordinator for the Division of Fish and Wildlife, Minnesota DNR. And with me is Molly Roski. Molly is the S&A Program Coordinator with the Division of Ecological and Water Resources with the Minnesota DNR. I just want to say I really appreciate the opportunity to be back here and presenting. I think this is my 5th iteration. Just like opening day of the trout season and opening day of the grouse season, I never sleep on the night before I have to come and present. And a little bit of that is just nervous energy, but you know, how many opportunities in life do you get to come somewhere and ask for millions of dollars to do habitat work that, you know, once I leave the DNR and have my bird dog in tow, I can walk out and look at the results of my own hard work and the hard work of all of our partners that are putting WMAs on the ground. That's like a big deal to me, and it's never lost. And the same with our scientific and natural area program. But anyways, thanks again for allowing us to present. This is our 14th phase of an ongoing and a very successful program. You've got a handout as part of your proposal, and you can take a look at the accomplishments in terms of accomplishment plan goal versus what we achieved. And in most cases, we either achieved the goal or exceeded it, sometimes significantly. But we're here asking for another phase of this funding for our program because our work clearly fits the constitutional intent of the Outdoor Heritage Fund, which is to protect, restore, and enhance prairies, wetlands, forests, and habitat for fish, game, and wildlife. And as I just said, we've been successful in utilizing our past Outdoor Heritage Fund appropriations to meet or exceed our accomplishment plan goals. And sort of like the story of the tortoise and the hare, you know, we might not be the fastest in getting our accomplishment plans goals met, but in the end, we meet them and oftentimes exceed them. So since we submitted our proposal in May, we've continued to build on this legacy of success. So in the last 3 weeks, we've closed on 2 projects in 2 WMA projects in southwestern Minnesota. One of them was a 160-acre addition to Talcott Lake WMA, and the other one was a 265-acre addition to Hopeful WMA, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later because it's such a cool project. Furthermore, we have binding agreements in place and plans to close on 2 additional projects by this fall. And one of the reasons we're waiting is just on landowners' wishes, really, not because we couldn't close them sooner. So to continue our work as outlined in the proposal that you already have, we're seeking $3.25 million to acquire 500 acres of WMAs or SNAs across the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council's Northern Forest, Forest Prairie, and Prairie Planning sections. And just to clarify that a little bit, our WMA work takes place in the Prairie Planning section, basically the southwestern portion of the state where we have the least amount of public land. Our SNA program can take place or seeks to take place across all those planning sections that I mentioned. And so to achieve this, the way we go about this is we identify high priority parcels. And in the case of WMAs, the way we do that is twice a year, we prioritize parcels through a regional ranking exercise where all of our 4 regions get any available parcels together, they rank them numerically, and then send them into the central office where then we have like a statewide ranking of what are the highest priority parcels for acquisition. So we do that, then we run them through what's called, as part of that, we run them through what's called a Strategic Wildlife Aquatic Acquisition Tool, our SWAT tool. And that's a GIS-based tool that scores those projects based on the attributes, natural resource attributes of the project. And then we looked at projects that satisfy 3 or more of what we call our SLAM goals, Strategic Land Asset Management goals. And also those that support, you know, our plans, things like our pheasant plan, our prairie plans, our duck plan, our Conservation Works 3.0 WMA, AMA strategic plan. In the case of SNAs, it's a little bit different. We prioritize those parcels located in conservation opportunity areas identified within the SNA Strategic Land Protection Plan. And again, we look to fund projects or pursue projects that achieve or satisfy 3 or more SLAM goals. Also within SNA, we prioritize sites of high or outstanding biodiversity significance, or that have high-quality native plant communities. Finally, on SNAs, an ecological evaluation is conducted by staff from the Minnesota Biological Survey prior to proceeding with any acquisition. We work with willing sellers. We seek county board approval before completing any WMA or SNA acquisition, and we actually are doing early county outreach even before we seek county board approval. We calculate and pay PILT to counties on all WMA and SNA acquisitions. And so that's, you know, that's kind of our request in a nutshell. It's very similar to what we request each year, for good reason, because it's a programmatic ask, and we feel like there's still plenty of work to be done. But I want to revisit that hopeful WMA project I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, because I think it'll help you better understand how your ongoing support helps us create critical habitat complexes. And that's something that we really are focusing on. Whether it's our own projects or projects that our partners are coming to you with for WMA or SNA acquisition, we're really trying to look at building on complexes of habitat. So back again to this hopeful project, I'm going to paint you a little picture. So I don't have drone footage or anything like that to share with you at this point, maybe sometime in the future. But back in 2015, the Pursoon family, they're the owners of this hopeful WMA tract, approached our area wildlife staff asking about the DNR's interest in acquiring this 265-acre tract of land. At the time, it was in a life estate for then 93-year-old Clara Pursoon, with her 5 children being the heirs to the property. That property is located 1 mile east of Tyler, Minnesota, in a heavily tiled and ditched farmland landscape. The majority of the parcel was enrolled in CRP, but in addition, the family had restored wetlands, planted woody cover, and established diverse native grassland cover on that CRP, all for the benefit of wildlife. And upon passing of Clara, the heirs wanted to see that property remain as wildlife habitat. So our area staff looked at that, and it was like a turnkey opportunity. You know, we talk about IDP work. The IDP work on the parcel was basically all done in terms of the habitat work. So significant savings for the state in terms of what we would have to outlay. So DNR looked at the parcel, talked to the family back then in 2015. Once Clara passed, they decided, yep, this makes sense. But you know, we don't like to just acquire a single parcel like this. We really look at things, again, in a complex manner. And I mean, not complex because it's hard to understand, but in complex, multiple pieces of property stuck together to create the greatest benefit for wildlife. And anybody who's driven across southwest Minnesota, you know, especially like late November after a good blizzard, realizes that there's a lot of space between wildlife habitat in parts of the state. And so what we want to do is, rather than trying to create 40-acre or 80-acre kind of postage stamps with nothing for another 6 or 10 miles, we're trying to create 3, 4, 5, 600-acre complexes so that you can kind of self-contain wildlife needs in one area. And so that was the idea that our area staff came up with. Well, 265 acres is a nice first chunk, but that's really not even enough to really support a significant wildlife population from a complex standpoint. But when they wrote a proposal and put together this proposal for the acquisition of this, they noted that, and this is their words, I'm quoting, "In traveling across this site, this parcel, this hopeful track 1, a piece of remnant prairie is pointed out. Wetlands appear from over a hillside, ducks and geese erupt in flight, deer dart out from the woody cover, and pheasants explode from the grassland. This is truly a vision come to prosper in a monoculture landscape. The Pursoon family, as well as a couple of their neighbors, had created what they called a little piece of heaven. So they took that little piece of heaven and they looked at other surrounding properties and connections they had with landowners with surrounding properties, and they realized that the landowners just to the south of this had 320 acres and had an interest in selling. Now you take 265 and you put 320 together, and now we're talking about a significant complex of land, where at current time, when they were talking about this, there was just this 265 of CRP. So they put together a project proposal that not only included that first tract, the Pursuin tract, but they put together a project proposal that included the tract to the south and a couple of other tracts that are potentially future acquisitions. So we went to work on trying to acquire these parcels. And we started back in, I think I came to the unit in 2016 and this was being talked about. So we started working on it in 2016, but really gained some traction with our Laws of 2017 funding. And with our Laws of 2017, we bought the 320 acre parcel to the south. That's all been restored now. It's in early kind of cover stage, so it's not in full bloom at this point. But then with Laws of 19, which I mentioned we just closed within the last 3 weeks, we bought that 265 acre tract to the north. So to make a long story short, in a matter of about 5 years, we've gone from a vision inspired by a family's conservation ethic to a 585 acre complex of permanently protected habitat that benefits farmland wildlife and pollinators while providing significant outdoor recreation opportunities for our state citizens. So in concluding, by fully funding our requests this year and becoming our partner in conservation, you will help us continue to permanently protect publicly accessible complexes like the hopeful example I just provided. And I'd hope that you'd find that worthy work and continue your support. And with that, we'd stand for questions.
Questions? Jamie.
Jamie Becker-Finn. Wondering, you were talking about what you use to prioritize parcels and what you're going to look at purchase at acquiring. Wondering how and if hunter pressure is one of those factors. I know, for example, Whitewater and Carlos Avery and the ones that are kind of within driving distance of population centers, sometimes it's almost, you almost can't hunt there if you don't get there early enough because there's so many people that want to access those WMAs. So just wondering if how that plays into your prioritization of different parcels.
Chair Hartwell, members, it's not a criteria, for instance, of our SWOT scoring tool. That might be like the natural place something like that would sit. It'd be interesting to figure out how you'd quantify that. It'd be pretty hard, to come up with a way to quantify that. But I live on the south side of Carlos Avery. I spend an inordinate amount of my time there. I go squirrel hunting with a longbow, which is basically just a walk in the woods in the wintertime. And you lose a lot of arrows, but I just spend a lot of time hiking there because it's an accessible large piece of property, and so I'm very familiar with the hunting pressure situation. And before I came to this position as an acquisition coordinator, for 10 years I was a hunter recruitment and retention coordinator for the Minnesota DNR. So things like recruitment and what you're talking about, it relates to in a big way with retention and recruitment, because people are turned off by hunter pressure. They don't want to come back and continue to hunt. If you've been a long-time hunter and every time you show up at your favorite place, there's more and more cars, that kind of turns you off too. It's not a criteria in our scoring. It's something we fully realize. I think that our strategy of trying to build on complexes, increase size of them, might have some mitigating effect, but I also think that creating numerous complexes in a sort of a geographic area helps spread that pressure out. And anybody, what your words really ring true when I think about getting in my car and driving 2.5 hours to southwest Minnesota to hunt pheasants. And I'm the hunter recruitment and retention coordinator, but my whole drive out there, my biggest prayer is when I get to my parking lot, there's not going to be anybody there, right? Which is really conflicts a person, but I don't know how else to get around that. I'm just honest about it, right? And so the thing that I've noticed that in areas of the state where we have lots of parcels, lots of complexes, that pressure tends to get spread out. And that when that pressure gets spread out, those issues around crowding and, you know, reducing quality of experience, I think to a certain extent get mitigated.
So you're one of those cars that gets there before I do. At Carlos Avery is what you're telling me.
Mr. Chair, members, just to build off of what Jay was saying for a moment, I should introduce myself. Molly Roski, SNA Program Supervisor for the DNR. The SNA program doesn't go out looking for parcels to protect based on hunter pressure, but much like the way the Division of Fish and Wildlife and the WMA component of this proposal do, we also are out there prioritizing acquisition sites based on our ability to create corridors and complexes. And typically when we are prioritizing potential SNA projects for funding like this through LSOHC, we're looking for SNAs where hunting may be useful to us as a resource management tool. So as most of you probably know, sort of the baseline default SNA level protections don't typically allow hunting, but it is allowable under certain criteria. And if the characteristics of a site meet that criteria, then that can be written into the specific rules for that site. And so when we're using this funding for SNA acquisition, we're looking for sites where hunting is an appropriate tool.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jay, I would suggest maybe you try a single shot 22. Squirrels are really good eating, which you haven't discovered yet. I don't know, I think I'm amused looking at your cost per acre. It's a little under 7,000 for prairie, which I assume maybe was good corn land, I don't know. But it's 8,000 for wetlands. So are you telling me that a swamp is worth more money now? Is that what I'm seeing there?
Chair Hartwell, Member Shara, actually when you look at that, you know, that includes all the costs, not just the land cost. So you think about restoration work on wetlands. That wetland restoration work is wildly expensive. Particularly, you know, our engineering work at the DNR is not particularly cheap, and oftentimes engineering work is a critical component of that wetland work. So you're right, if you're buying existing wetland, your cost per acre is going to be lower. But when you're buying parcels, which if you look at southwestern Minnesota, especially if you look at something with the type of GIS layer that allows you to see restorable wetlands on a property, oftentimes when you acquire a property and you do your IDP work on it, that cost of IDP work drives the overall cost per acre that you're seeing there in that calculation up quite a bit. So that's the difference. And you know, when we put those proposals together, the easiest way to deal with that is to take your total acres, your total budget, and divide it, and that comes up your average cost per acre, right? But that's what we're trying to do there, is actually give maybe a little bit more, I don't know, realistic difference in the costs that we might experience if and when we acquire a parcel. And the other factor you got to think about is when we put these proposals in, we create a parcel list, right? And then the proposals are deliberated on. It takes a year to find out if we're going to get funding. Well, you know, not all the farmers and landowners on that parcel list are waiting for our decision. So oftentimes when we get to the point where we receive funding, we have to do an amendment, add additional parcels to that list that have come available, and oftentimes those parcels might have completely different, you know, overall characteristics and needs than the ones that were originally proposed. So the best way to look at that is it's an estimate.
Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mark Holston. Jay, I'm looking on page 6 of the book. You don't need to have it, that's fine. But it's the non-outdoor heritage fund appropriations list. That's the page I'm looking at.
It's like a table?
It's a table, and it lists from 2009 to the present the resources that you've received for this program.
Okay.
And a point to note is that 2014 was the last time you received any bonding dollars. And I'm not sure I understand how it's worded, because it's worded WMA bonding, rim critical habitat match. So I don't know how they did that, or if that's just somehow you just merge those two separate funding streams together. But bonding wouldn't have been critical habitat match.
No,
Not to get lost in that point,
you're right.
okay? The point is that when we look at the other funding sources, those are the rim critical habitat match, that's your license plates. This is more for the members here. WMA surcharge, that's from your hunting license fees. There's the surcharge that's attached to your license fees. Those revenue streams, those and the environmental trust fund. So those are your ongoing kind of annual appropriations. Bonding, which used to be in every other year, sometimes every year, depending upon the legislative cycle, but there used to be a regular stream of revenue from bonding to WMA S&A acquisition. And I see in 2014 that has basically dropped off the map. Now, I go back to the discussions when we were debating this in the legislature, when I left, when I was at the DNR and the legislature passed this. I get the whole supplement versus supplant argument, and what it actually is in the legislative process or isn't. But I also know the spirit in which the fund was created. And it's not being met. So I'm just trying to understand as I look at this, are we adding or are we just maintaining since 2014 our effort?
Chair, members, Member Holston, when you say adding, are we adding additional WMA acres?
When I do a historical analysis of effort, the Outdoor Heritage Fund was supposed to be additive to our current continual effort. With the dropping of bonding off the table, are we maintaining our effort? Are we adding to our effort of our historical approach? Or are we just kind of maintaining, are we treading water with your program? I'd have to go back and look at that historical data to actually do that analysis to be able to answer that clearly, because I've only been with the unit since 2016, but my gut sense is that we are adding. I'd be interested to see the historical analysis on that one, because I'm not so sure you are. That's not your fault.
No, but we can try to provide that.
I'm pointing it out. I'm not blaming you. I'm pointing out to the council how important the work that we're doing, specifically to your two programs, and what this fund was intended to do versus what I think is actually happening at the legislature.
I think what you're saying is you think the legislature has seen us as the way to fulfill the obligation that they were in the past funding through bonding.
I think this table clearly shows that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if we want a longer conversation on this topic, but clearly the presenter doesn't necessarily have the answer as to why the legislature does or doesn't do something. So to that, I would just say that's a bigger question. Obviously, discussion point we could have probably at another time that would go very long. The bottom line is I think that the projects that are being discussed here are here appropriately and will likely see support in one way, form, or another, whether bonding is available or not.
So I have just one question for you, which is on the scalability issue, which I asked to Bowser as well, which you heard because you're nodding. Can you answer it from DNR's perspective?
Chairman Hartwell, members, yes. So I was hoping to have somebody from our Division of Wildlife with us today, but unfortunately they're quarantining right now, so I wanted to have them help out with that. But so the scalability, and particularly I think as it relates to personnel, is what your question was. If you look at the amount that we have budgeted for, like the WMA acquisition coordinator and the SNA acquisition coordinator or acquisition staff to do the actual acquiring of the land, that portion of our budget remains pretty constant, and it's a pretty small amount to begin with. I mean, if you total all those together, I think it comes out to something like a 0.46 FTE, a total of $112,500 over 3 years. The big bump in this year's budget is the same one you would have seen when I presented in Laws of 19. In Laws of 19, we created a position within the division called an IDP coordinator. And the IDP coordinator, whose name is Jennifer Olson, who I hope to have here with us today, manages IDP, sort of the entire IDP program for all WMA parcels by all partners, not just the parcels in our proposal that we acquire. And so in 2019, the decision was made after discussions internally with the DNR to have that position sit in my appropriation. Asked for it. It was funded for 3 years by the council. Now we need to ask for that funding again to continue that position. So the increase there is really not scalable, simply because Jennifer is working on projects across all of open appropriations. And I had her send me some notes so I could answer this question a little bit more intelligently. And so right now, she's working on IDP projects related to 47 active open appropriations, okay? That's eight different partner organizations are involved with those, including a DNR, and they go across 23 separate DNR work areas. There's 113 parcels that currently have active IDPs on that she's managing, and there's more being added monthly. So the reason that personnel isn't scalable, Chair, is that in the case of Jennifer, her position is working across several different appropriations. And so if, you know, by in essence cutting that, we would cut the ability for her to be able to manage that program effectively.
So let me just ask a question. If you got no funding this year, what would you do with the obligation to all the other projects that this funding request is apparently funding then?
That I can't answer right now. I'd have to talk with the folks in the Division of Wildlife and find out what their solution would be to that. I don't have the answer for that now.
Fair enough. Jamie, you have a question, and then we'll break.
Maybe you can answer this. There's a lot of accelerator programs for the addition of WMAs, and I don't think there's any for the SNAs. I think this is the program that funds the SNA acquisitions. But are there more acres that come in through the acceleration programs from other entities versus this program itself, or are there more acres that the DNR secures through this program?
Chair Hartwell, members, Member Swenson, just so I'm going to paraphrase your question to make sure I get it right. So what you're asking is, with all the other groups that ask for money to acquire WMAs and gift to the state, that amount of acres coming to the DNR versus what we acquire in our own appropriation. It's ours, yes, there's significantly more acres that come to us via partners, what we call our partners, that acquire WMAs and gift them to the state. And I spend a great deal of my time. We have a 0.25 position that works on acquiring as part of our appropriation. My other 0.75 I spend mainly in a role that helps either identify parcels and rank parcels, or in the process of the conveyance of the parcels from the partners to the DNR. That's a big part of our work. So yes, that is in fact.
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate your time this morning. It's 10:35. We'll come back in 15 minutes at 10:50.
Thank you.